Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plaw, at Andrew Plaw Tech. Back for a normal episode. I've been on the road for a while. We've had some queued up PowerShell Summit episodes, the bar sessions. Definitely had a lot of those this year. Appreciate everyone who joined on those. Had some fantastic conversations. But let's get into the pre-show where I share some cool things that have been happening. So Chris Wynn, the PM of Windows Terminal, announced a new module, winget.command-not-found, a new PowerShell module that will help you install missing commands and tools that you may have. Cool little integration for the Windows folks out there. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. You can check it out. There's a dev blog accompanying it as well. I want to shout out everyone that I've met over the past few weeks. I've met some listeners for the first time in person, met new people, found some new people who started listening. So hello to everyone. I want to give a special shout out to Gainesville fellow Ryan. I don't know if he wants me to say his full name or not, so I won't. But Ryan is from my hometown, and I met him at MSP Geek. Turns out we have a bunch of the same friends. So Ryan, I hope you're doing well, holding it down in the MSP space. I also want to say that this is a pretty special episode. This will be dropping on a federal holiday. Today, I just drove home from MSP GeekCon earlier today, and it is, in fact, my birthday at the time of this recording. I'll bring Judd on in a little bit, and maybe we can celebrate together. But there's a lot of celebrations to be had, so I think the theme of this episode is going to be celebration. We have a lot of exciting topics that we're going to cover. Wanted to mention the PowerShell logo. It's on Thingiverse. Shout out to Matthew Gill. We're going to mention him a little bit later. He did some awesome 3D printings of the PowerShell logo for PowerShell Summit. And if you have a 3D printer and you want a printed out PowerShell logo, well, you can get one. Not a whole lot of work is required on your end. Also want to shout out a blog from Sid500, Hyper-V enabling VM resource metering. If you are interested in doing that, check out the blog. Makes it a lot simpler for you. Tip of the week. I've been working with REST APIs this week, and I had to pass a comma-separated list of properties. So basically, host name, comma, username, comma, whatever, so on and so forth. And I was like, okay. But then whenever you put that in a URL as part of a query string, like the stuff that comes after the question mark, it has to be URL encoded. So instead of spaces, you need like % signs and all that fancy stuff. So check out system.web.http utility ::URL encode, and then you put your properties in there. You can search it up and you'll be able to connect the dots. But it's a super helpful way if you're working with REST APIs and you're doing some stuff to URL encode things, make that a little bit simpler. All right, it is time. I've been waiting. I'm just seeing little Judd's face. He's down there. So I would like to welcome returning guest, the record holder, I believe, of the longest podcast in PowerShell podcast history. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen Judd.
Oh, wait. Here I am.
Golf clap. Amazing.
Yep. Had a little intro there with my awkward Judd glitter sticker.
Yes, glitter stickers. And I want to talk about swag, man, because I saw you at Summit. Is it fair to call you a swag lord?
I don't know that that's a term that would apply to me appropriately, because I don't feel like I'm a lord of anything. But I did have some swag.
You had a lot of swag, man. You want to tell us about some of this swag? Because honestly, there were so many different pieces. And by the end of the week, you were adorned with a golden chain with a giant PowerShell logo at the bottom.
So in my background, let's see if I can get my finger close to it, is you mentioned Matthew Gill. And I do have my PowerShell. That thing's, I think it's 6 inches by 8 inches, or it's 8 inches by 8 inches, and it has a monster golden chain. Oh, you know what? I probably shouldn't go get it, because I have it on the wall. It's fine. It'll just be our background piece. If I'd have thought about it, I'd have been wearing it when you brought me on camera, because that would have been hilarious.
Now, is that your swag that you've printed that you're wearing? Shortcut Your Life PowerShell logo?
Yes. So this is one of my designs. In fact, I recently got the Shortcut Your .life domain, and Shortcut Your .life goes to my blog site now. So that's kind of cool. And
yeah,
yes, I have it in various sticker forms as well, because swag.
dude,
But
you got that personal branding class. That's a great idea.
yeah. And so I unleashed my new design this year. So I have a new design, and it looks like this.
Nice.
And so I had this in button form and pin form and sticker form, and funny enough, temporary tattoo form.
Yes, those were a hit.
Those were a hit. It was a lot of fun. It was the fun is doing the designs and then handing them out to people, and people appreciate the designs. Like this one. Oops, hard to see because of the reflectivity in my lights, but it's PowerShell is efficiently effective. And I had someone that I know tell me, "You're the only person I know who can manage to get a dad joke into a sticker."
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Oh, I completely am with you there. But I forgot one thing on the pre-show. I mentioned a few months ago, you might have heard of it. I started the PowerShell MVP Awards as a way to shine some more light on the amazing people in the PowerShell community. We have so many. It is hard to recognize everybody, but I would be remiss if I did not take advantage of this opportunity to award our very first PowerShell Podcast MVP winner, Stephen Judd, beacon of the community. So many people resonate with your messaging and are inspired by you. It was so awesome to see how celebrated you were at Summit. So I couldn't think of a more deserving first recipient of our PowerShell Podcast MVP Awards. The gift is in the mail, as they say.
I feel like I'm blushing here. I'm turning a little red. I'm honored, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's celebration episode, man. We're here to celebrate the amazing community and all the folks in it who are doing fantastic work, such as yourself. You got the swag on lock too. I mean, you got all angles, man.
Yep. The thing that I do all this for, one, is just, it's enthusiasm. And enthusiasm tends to be infectious as well. When someone's excited about something, it's hard for the other people around not to be excited about it. And that's one of the reasons why I do it. And the other is, it is a little bit of personal branding for me, to hand this stuff out, especially, it has my face on it, for crying out loud. But it's a joke. It's a story. It's something that connects with people because, we're all on certain levels of our own personal journey. And some people are at the start and some people are at the finish. And there's a lot of people in between. And some people do career pivots. I've had to do a couple in my career recently where you have to make tough choices and go, okay, here was my comfort zone. Now I'm out of it. I got to do something else. And I just, what popped into my head was I remembered someone saying, well, I don't know much. I'm just new. I'm like, great. You've never seen how we do things before. Come read our documentation and tell me whether it makes any sense. Because I wrote it. I knew it before I wrote it. I'm not going to know where things are in the documentation that don't make sense or I make assumptions. And a new person without all the background and the story and whatever, they're going to come in and go, I don't get this. You mentioned this, I don't get it. Where would I find that information? I'm like, we need a link. We need some more information. We need to explain this, or it's not as intuitive, or we're missing something in our training where when we onboard people, they should know this. And that's super valuable when you're bringing on new people because they can see things you cannot because you're just too used to it.
Completely agree. Those people who are new to the community are cherished for so many reasons. We want to see the community keep growing. If you're new, we want to make sure that you don't get burnt out and quit and feel like you can't contribute. We are all ears, as I think most smart communities would be, right? They want to have a healthy culture and community that they all thrive in. So PowerShell, we are fortunate to also have that same perspective. So,
yep. Yeah, and we've had really good leaders get us to where we are now. And so we're just, I made the joke at Summit that because Jim Truer was in the audience, that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, which for me is everyone over 5'10", because I'm a little height challenged myself. So, but that's the joke. But the truth is, there's people that were very intentional about the giving of themselves and their time and their ideas in order to make the community successful.
Yep. We are very fortunate to have those community leaders and to have them have messaging that so many resonated with and took on the same mindset to create this awesome community that we have today. Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
I mean, for me, things like, the idea of tying things to .NET and being able to use the .NET architecture and what it's capable of. So if you want to stay in the PowerShell world and commands, they're there. But if you need the speed and the power of the .NET objects directly, you can use them. You mentioned the URL encoding, one of my personal favorites, since I kind of like regex. I'm a little bit known for talking about the power and usefulness of regex in your life because it shortcuts your life. You can do a regex escape. And so if you don't know which characters to escape, you can do the regex accelerator. So you do the regex : escape. And then in the parentheses afterwards, you put whatever text you want to have the accelerator escape for you. Super useful.
Yeah. I know you like harping on the regex bandwagon, but it is such a powerful tool. Once you have it accessible to you and you already know PowerShell, there's a ton that's available to you. But also regex is used in many different places, not just in PowerShell, that you might encounter in your time in IT.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people, it's like, learning regex, it seems really cryptic because it is. But once you kind of get the basics, and I'm not talking about being an expert at it, because there's still things that I'm like, the look ahead and look behinds throw me every once in a while. And I'm like, all right, I got to go back and relearn, review this, make sure it's good. But for simple things like you're trying to find files and file names, so you can just do, get child item and pipe that into the where command. And then instead of doing you do match. And one of the things that I tell people on that is like, all right, well, tell me how you would do a list of all the files that start with either A, B, or C, but none others. Well, if you're using that's either impossible or you're into not code golf, but you're into some kind of code challenge to figure that out. And in regex, it's easy. You just do the square braces, A, B, C, and you're done.
It is really a very powerful, I almost said PowerShell, powerful toolkit within PowerShell that you can use
for sure
to great effect. And text manipulation in general is such an important skill to have, because otherwise it is such a manual process and you're so likely to encounter many needs for text parsing and altering and things like that.
I've been doing, while you're coughing, I've been doing a lot of text manipulation and parsing recently because my new role is very Linux heavy. And so Linux, being a text-based operating system instead of an object-oriented operating system like Windows, means that there's a lot of text coming back from native commands that you're going to have to deal with. And so, me being able to parse through the text that I get back and having the skills and knowing how to sort that out and using capture groups and regex, it just makes it so much easier. And it makes my life as an administrator a lot easier because I can just gather up the value from the result of a command. And because I'm a PowerShell person and I've been doing PowerShell for a while, it's just more comfortable for me. It's easy for me to do. Sed and awk, yes, I can do them. They're not something I've been spending the last 15 years doing like I have with PowerShell.
Okay. Yeah, because I know you've given a talk on PowerShell and security. That as well, but PowerShell on Linux.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to dive into that a little bit deeper because I find that very interesting. I often tell people, like, you get this PowerShell tool set, you can take it with you. And hey, you've switched to being a Linux person and you've been able to take it with you. So are you running pwsh.exe and then calling the Linux utilities from within that environment so you can make use of all the PowerShell goodness?
Yes. That is exactly what I'm doing. Now, I use the PowerShell commandlets where I can, because those just automatically return objects, and it makes it easier. But yes, I will run the Linux native commands directly in the PowerShell shell so that I can then manipulate the text coming back from it.
Yeah, but Linux, you still can't avoid the text manipulation bit. That's sort of the upside of PowerShell, is the object-oriented nature, but at least you have tools you're comfortable with, because that's what really counts. You're actually being able to focus on the task at hand rather than learning a whole new tool set. And when you go to your next job, maybe it's something else. You can still use PowerShell as kind of your home base. Ideally, maybe you're still using VS Code as well, maybe even the same workspace file and settings that you enjoy. But yeah, you can just take that tool set with you.
Exactly. So like, when you run a command and you get results back and you're wanting to know, well, how many lines am I getting back from this command? That's just a simple one. Well, in Linux, you pipe that into word count, which is WC, and then you need to tell it just count the lines, otherwise it'll count all the words because it's word count. So then you put -L on it. So it's WC space -L that you've just piped into, and it gives you a number back and says, okay, here's what it is. Here's the count. And you'll be like, okay, well, I can see I've got this many back. Well, you do the same thing in PowerShell. I still run the same command. I'm going to get text back, but it's PowerShell's going to process it. I pipe that into measure object, and it tells me how many are in there, right? And it's just a thing. But then I can say, well, go do all of these files and tell me the average length of which one's in there. So it's easy to do that in PowerShell. It's challenging to do that in Bash. Now, you can do it. I'm not saying you can't. And that's one of the things that I've had to learn, is that in digital security, there's the principle of living off the land, which I know you've talked about before, and I've talked about before. So you need to know how to do that in Bash. But if you're good at something, use your strengths.
Yep. If you're doing a hack the box or a CTF and they only had certain tools available, yeah, you can make do. But in your day-to-day, you're trying to get things done. And if you've done PowerShell for a while, you know that space you get into when you're chasing a problem, you're running commands interactively and actually exploring and seeing what the heck is going on. Well, you can still have that experience. And let me tell you, I love that. I feel it whenever I talk about it. I'm like, oh, I just love those moments when you're just in it and you're doing your job and the commands are going by and you're piping things together and you're collecting information and you're looking back at the variables and certain properties to see what's going on. And then all of a sudden you hopefully solve something, or at least create a tool that will help you troubleshoot this faster in the future.
Yep. One of my favorite functions that I've written relatively recently, is we use Ansible at my work, and it returns back something that looks like JSON but isn't really JSON, and it was challenging for me to figure out what the results were in doing what I wanted from just an Ansible command. And I'm like, you know what? It's text. I'm going to write a function to parse it. And so then I parse it. So now I can run Ansible commands against a subset of the servers, a single server, or all the servers. And I can take the result that comes back and parse it. And so then I can do things like a simple one. Go show me all the operating system versions that we have by running a command to read what's in the os-release file, and then group them by the OS version so that I know how many of each one we have. Easy to do in PowerShell once I have the object. And I'm like, oh, okay, here's how I can do that. And being able to parse that output, that's where the power showed up. Because once I've written the function, I don't have to write that function again. I don't have to remember that command set again. I don't have to run history or do Control-R in the console and Control-R and Control-R and Control-R, trying to find the command that I did one time that it doesn't have. Ooh, I got to tell you about a pet peeve of mine right quick.
What's that?
So in Bash, it stores your history when it successfully closes your shell out.
Oh.
If your shell crashes for whatever reason, bye-bye history. In PS readline, every time you're running a command, it's saving it into your history. Also, by default, the history, at least on our systems, saves 1,000 commands. So you get 1,000 of them, and then you're done. But if you're like every time you're LSing, trying to find something, ls, grep this, grep that, each one is its own one. So you're burning up your 1,000. PS read line just keeps rolling. So then when I go look for commands, when I'm running PowerShell as my shell, when I go to find a command I've done before, it's very easy for me to find it, and I have the entire history with me. And it's just easier to work with. In Bash, too many times I've had that thing disappear on me, and I'm like, come on, I can't remember that command. And having the history, it's like a cheat code for me for bad memory.
Yeah. Whenever you're able to not have to remember everything, always a good thing. There's so many technologies out there to learn to keep up with all of them and remember everything. It would take a lot.
That's the tragedy to some degree of being in IT for a long time, is I can't just throw out memory that I have of things that happened in the past and just replace it with new stuff. It's like, I don't need to know that anymore. Like, for example, I did this so many times. I remembered how in Windows 3.1, how to reset the color space without looking at the computer. Because we'd have some users, I was on phone support, that's how I got my first start. And we'd have some users be like, I want to change the white and black so that I have white text on a black background. And so they would change the text to black and then click apply, and everything's gone, because they didn't change the background to white before they clicked apply. So then they'd call and they'd be like, I can't see any of the text. I still remember how to fix that.
Sounds like a good
do me any good today, because it's Windows 3.1. Who needs that information?
I will also say your comments earlier about the history file of PS readline. So that's the history save count. You could check that by running get PS readline option and checking out the history save count property. I think the default is 4,096, but you can increase that, which is pretty sweet.
In my profile, I set that to 65,000, whatever the binary is of that. Now, if I remember correctly, that save count actually saves all of them, but those are the ones that loads in to the history for the Control R and the Control F,
W,
S
something
to use. Yeah, because I one time I was like, okay, if it only gives me 4,000, that's somewhat risky. I may lose some stuff. And then I went and looked, and the count was actually in that file was a lot longer in the history file itself. But when it loads up the history in order to give you your history, you're telling it how far to go back. And it's just a memory thing. It's how much memory. I believe that's how it works. I'm not expert accurate on that, but I think that's how it works.
Sean Wheeler, if we're wrong, let us know. We'll hit us up with that errata in a future episode.
That's right.
I'll also say, I'm not super familiar with the Linux command line. I do know in the PowerShell world, the team is pretty heavily focused, not exclusively on, but one of their focuses is the console experience and that experience that you have and making that as good as possible with things like you're talking about with the history and PS readline and all that. I don't know if there's that same type of effort or things along those lines in the Linux world. So whenever you're talking about the comfort, I don't know if it...
Well, Bash has been around for a while, and Z Shell, I think,
ZSH
is kind of the hot property, because it's that's the one that I think Macs are using by default. Not being a Mac expert, that's not my lane to go trudging through. But Corn Shell, Z Shell, Bash. There's other shells. That's the fun part about Linux, is you can have multiple shells, and they all kind of do their own thing, have their own features. That's where I am with PowerShell. When I talk to people about it, and they're like, I don't want to put PowerShell in my environment. And I said, it's a shell. What is it about it you don't want in your environment? Well, then you start to get into the belief systems of people. It's from Microsoft. Okay, yeah, it is from Microsoft. So if you want zero Microsoft in your environment, there's nothing I can do for you. I can show you what it's capable of. And you're like, okay, I can see where that's useful. I was fortunate at current role where they already had PowerShell on a server that I was working with, And I was glad to find it because I was like, aha, home base for me, baby. I'm ready to go. And I asked my boss, of course, like, hey, do you mind if I use this in our daily work or in my daily work? He's like, no, I don't mind. It's already there. I'm like, right, it's there. I'll use it. So I did. And I have been.
Yeah. And I think that sentiment of Microsoft being untrustworthy, I'm not saying, not defending them majorly, but I think over the years they have shown that they are a bit of a different company, with PowerShell being open source and Microsoft doing open source stuff in general. It is a little promising, but I can understand if you're not in that world, you maybe haven't seen those things. You haven't realized that, there are some maybe new indicators of trust, and it is open source. So you can read it and make your own determinations.
Yeah, I like to show how the logging and the process, how you can turn on the logging even in Linux, and you can see all the commands that are being run, and you can see the commands inside of commands that are being run. So when you can basically get the whole command process tree, if you will. And when you show somebody that, you're like, there's no way to hide here, really, if you're using PowerShell. In Bash, there's possibly ways to hide, but I'm gonna say the security is really good in PowerShell, because it is. And it is very difficult to hide. And you got to do some subversion before you can get to the point where you can hide yourself. And by then, if your attackers are in that position already, your game is already mostly gone anyway. But doing the same things in Bash, there's easy ways, just simple ways to hide your commands in Bash so that they don't get logged. And that bugs me. And I'm like, let's take a look at which one is actually better at keeping track of who's running what commands. And let's have a bake-off, if you will.
I love highlighting how easy of a win it can be for people to configure PowerShell security, because it is one of the selling points of the language. It really is. It is such a significant value add to PowerShell when you compare it to other languages, even like Python. But the truth is, so many people have not put in any effort to configure things securely.
Yeah,
that's what I see, at least.
Yeah, I think that's funny. That there was a chart out that I saw one time that someone built, and it was their opinion, of course. And they're like, here's what the security people or the security-minded people are focused on. And it was like this real edge case stuff. And here's what security attackers are doing. And they're trying to smish or phish or whatever your users, or they're doing graph attacks against either your accounts payable team or your executives. Anybody who can send money away from your organization, those are the targets. It's like, why don't they attack accounting in general? Well, because who cares about accounts receivable? I'm not going to get paid from accounts receivable. That's me paying into your organization. I want to get AP. I want to get the accounts payable people, because those are the people who send out checks. I want them. Yeah, assuming attacker person.
Yes, of course. We're all above board over here. I wouldn't assume you're a black hat hacker.
I don't like black hats. They make my head too hot.
Tan hats are where it's at.
That's right. Yeah, are you liking my old school Microsoft Azure hat?
I am geeking out over it. It's funny, man. Oh gosh, you remember when Azure, and I guess it sort of still is the new hotness of everyone's moving to it. But do you remember when that all first started coming out?
Yeah, I remember the Resource Manager version 1. It was rough, man. Anybody who's used it knows it's like, whew, this is challenging. But what a monumental leap the Azure Resource Manager, I think that's the official name of it, what we have today, is a monumental leap forward, and still is growing and is still capable. So whoever kudos to whoever did some of the architectural design work on that, because it's doing a lot of heavy lifting still. And I think that was 2015 when I first got the migration over to the Azure Resource Manager.
Yeah, I think they've come a long way. Still got some work to do, but I remember in the old days. No, right? Definitely not. I think that 365 has come a really long way as well. I remember we were early adopters of Exchange Online back in the day in Teams, and it was a struggle bus. It left a flavor in one's mouth that you didn't forget, but they've gotten better. So shout out.
Yeah. I think it was 21 when I changed jobs and went to Meta Platforms Incorporated, at the time Facebook, before they changed their name. And so that kind of took me out of the Azure role. And before that, I was in digital security. And so I was using a lot of Azure, but I wasn't the Azure person at the organization. Prior to that, I was kind of an Azure architect. So I did a lot of Azure prior to the digital security role. And so recently, the reason I told you that is recently I went in and just in Azure, hadn't been in there for a while, created a storage account, and was just kind of marveling at the changes of the wizard and how many options there are. I'm like, wow, the cloud really doesn't ever sit still.
And what they say is PowerShell is the language of the cloud. I've heard Microsoft people say that. I know internally they build on it heavily, like on top of it. And, behind the scenes, PowerShell is largely at work for a lot of the cool stuff you see in Azure.
Yep.
But when it comes to those platforms, I love all the cool new features. What I care about more than anything and what I look to see more of is secure by default, right? I want to see good templates. I don't, let's guide as many of those maybe people who are newer to the space in the right direction as we can. Because it's such a widely used product, you're going to have so many people nexting, doing the absolute basic, not configuring it to their specifications or how they should. So the easier we can make that for people, and I think that with a platform like Azure or AWS or whatever have you, you have a lot of ability to make that easier, but it is a pretty complex thing to do. But that's just what I'm looking for. I want to see the world security get up.
Yeah, increasing that baseline security is really important. I mean, how many breaches were caused by an accidental public read to an S3 bucket? I mean, for crying out loud, it's like, how many of these are we gonna have to chew our way through? Well, okay, before you start, pointing the finger at everyone else, how many have been because someone leaked the storage key for their storage account in Azure? Maybe not as many, but there's definitely been some of those. And how often do organizations rotate their keys? Like, okay, is that part of your procedure or is it not? Because if it's not, then you're just rolling the dice on some leak. Speaking of leaks, I showed my API key for the OpenAI in my presentation that I gave with Jason Helmick on the Azure CloudShell at Summit. So I'm sure when you see the video of that, when it gets released on YouTube, here's my Open API key. So yeah, I rotated that thing. I had some very kind people in the audience go, hey, by the way, you might want to change that.
It happens. It happens.
It does happen.
Not a production system, just your little personal card.
Yeah, it was just my product. It wasn't the company, it was me, but my credit card was on the other end of that. So, that could be impactful.
That most certainly could be. Now, we've sort of touched on some of the talks, but I just want to point out, you've been a busy bee lately, man. I think I was asking you, what talks you done lately? You started listing off. I had to, let me get some notes. This is too much to remember. So you've been talking, we just covered some PowerShell and Linux. You've been talking about digital security.
Yep.
You're mentioning CloudShell. You gave a presentation at Summit with Jason Helmick.
Yep.
Hello. Congratulations, man. That's huge. How was that?
That was a highlight. I mean, first of all, there's nothing better than pulling a dad joke on Jason when you're on stage and he's not expecting it.
And you get to see the authentic reaction of, yep, cameras are on. Here we are.
Oh, it was great. I love that. But I mean, he's a high energy presenter and he's exceptionally passionate about the work that he's done and the work that his team is doing and the work that other people are doing that Microsoft is benefiting from and he's benefiting from, and the whole org and the world, so that what we talked about earlier is that enthusiasm, that excitement, it's just contagious. And so for me, I'm kind of a high energy person when I present as well. And so the two of us on stage at the same time with our high energy and, just it was a fantastic experience. And I would say the reviews are in. The feedback we got from the session were very positive.
Awesome.
It was great.
I think it's easier to be enthusiastic, and I'm a pretty passionate, enthusiastic person as well. But I find that it's easier to be passionate and enthusiastic with something when you understand and are somewhat connected to the impact of it. Like when you know the impact that PowerShell can have on someone's life because you've lived it, it's a lot easier to be passionate and want to share that with others. And I think Jason has really seen a lot of impact on the world. It's really awesome.
Well, they recently made some decent changes to the CloudShell experience. And so, it wasn't quite released when we gave the talk. So we weren't able to demonstrate and show a lot of what it could do. But, Jason was talking about the documentation that's going to be coming out and the things that you can do with it and how that's going to benefit large orgs and small orgs and medium-sized orgs and individual users as well. And so, he got all very excited about it. And I was excited about the fact that, the things that I've learned about Linux, because CloudShell is Linux-based, that, the things that I've been learning are actually helpful and useful to me when I'm using CloudShell. And I use CloudShell all the time because it's a shell that I don't have to maintain, and it's available pretty much everywhere. So it's great.
It's pretty sweet on your phone as well. So like, you can run PowerShell on your phone. Yeah, no, you can be on your phone running PowerShell, doing cool things.
Yep.
And I like how it kind of connects you to all your stuff automatically. You don't have to do all the Azure modules and all that kind of thing. It's kind of boom, you're just in your space.
Yep. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that just makes it, back to shortcutting your life. You want these things to work. You want them to work well, but you want it to be easy too. When you're working with something and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I authenticate? Do I have all the right versions of everything? Have I updated my modules? Have I patched the system? Can I run it here? Can I run it there? And I have scripts that I use that are stored in my CloudShell, and I have specifically put them in a place where I can access them directly, and they're in a Git repo. So I have it like, belt, suspenders, and something else holding your pants up kind of thing. But the cool thing is I can be on any system I have, any of them, notice that I need to make an adjustment, make the adjustment, push it up to the Git repo, then whatever system I'm on now has that change. And I hate to even use this phrase because it's so clownish, but it just works. And the fact that it's here, there, and everywhere, and I don't have to maintain it, and I don't have to worry about it, and because I've got it in a Git repo, I've got full history on everything I've done and every change I've made. It's great. I love it. It's a sweet setup.
Bibbidi bop baloo. I love CloudShell too.
I probably should do a blog on that, on how I have all that set up. I should do that.
Shortcut your life. Just write a blog on it.
I know. Go to blog.stevenjudd.com. Shameless promotion. Shortcut your .life.
Yes.
I need to get a little black marker here and put a little dot here. So,
Hey, next iteration.
That's
what we're all about, right? Growing through the process. A couple tweaks here and there. Well, I want to cover this other talk that I haven't mentioned yet, which was you giving a talk about learning and how to become a lifelong learner. What's the title of the talk?
So it's Learning is Like Running a Marathon. And then the subtitle of the talk is Life Lessons from a Wannabe Amateur Athlete. That would be me.
Yes.
Right.
So can we?
As you can see in my background, I have a few medallions that I've collected. Yes. Very much so.
I am the world's okayest pickleball player.
Heck yeah.
Better than some.
I am a very middling distance runner who never hit his prime and is well past it.
I like the phrase, I'll never be as good as I was. I'm starting to feel some of that, getting in my 30s. Mentioned it was my birthday. I'm 31 now. It's kicking off.
Yeah. I hate to tell you this, but last year your warranty expired. And so things are going to start breaking that you didn't expect.
Yeah. Well, I just did my first round of physical therapy, and yeah, we're feeling it.
Oh, here we go.
But we're all in this together, so it'll be all right.
But back on the topic, the talk is about just some things that I learned when preparing for a marathon, because that was my thing for quite a while, 10 years almost, where I was running marathons. And there are things that you do to be successful in your runs in a marathon that I realized, oh, wait, this applies in other places as well. Life truths are life truths, no matter where they are and how you're using them. 100. If it's I put zero effort into something, why am I not successful? Do I need to explain the zero effort part as to why you're not getting your results, right? But then there's other things, because you don't just say, you know what I'm going to do next week? I'm going to run a marathon. You need to prepare. And if you're going to prepare for anything, you better have a plan. And so these are I'm giving you a little preview of the talk, but that's part of my outline. Is I say, all right, if you're going to do something that's worthwhile and is going to matter to you, whether it matters to anyone else or not, here are some things you need to consider and think about, because then you can be successful without them, but you will be more successful if you implement them.
I totally resonate with that messaging completely. I think being a lifelong learner is, like you said, these life truths. Yeah, they apply to IT and what we're doing here, but they apply to every aspect of your life. We're all growing in different ways, even if that's just as a person. We're always taking in new experiences, hopefully getting something from them. I like to, whenever I think about how to kind of get people to be ready for that, to undertake something big. Maybe it's getting a tech role they never thought they could do. They feel underqualified. I think it's one, you have to identify that you, assuming you're just an average person or even below average, totally fine. You can accomplish great things if you do the things that have been proven to be effective. You have to be okay trying, being vulnerable, because you might not be successful. There might be some bumps along the way, which is perfectly fine. It's actually you're going to be okay. Everyone else has been okay, but it can be really scary before you've kind of started going down that place. And, I think some of us have had our experiences with that, but once you can kind of get a hold of that and be okay being out there and growing, if you apply that to a hobby and you achieve some kind of success, you learn more about yourself and how you learn and how you grow. And I believe in people so much. I love seeing when people are able to connect those dots. There's a lot of great examples of it. Gotta shout out my man, Clayton Tiger. He's a great example of someone who went out there. They did the steps they needed to do. He learned along the way. Not every blog post was a hit. He made some mistakes in the modules that he had to clean up, probably tons of other hurdles along the way. But you keep with it and you end up in a fantastic spot, and you're still on that journey, and you just keep working on those skills throughout the rest of your life. And it sort of is like your relationship with yourself, sort of, when you're trying to grow and putting yourself out there. So it's a really great opportunity for personal growth, professional growth. It's good from every angle.
I agree. That's one of the things I remember we talked about this in a previous episode. It's what would you tell your younger self? It's take more chances, especially when you're early in your career, because that sets you up for a little bit more later. However, this still applies to me. I'm not done yet, thankfully, and I'm going to still have to take some chances. I've been taking chances with the Linux work. Recently, I've started doing more with AI, and got to take some chances there. And you can stand on the sidelines and criticize people that are in the game, or you can be in the game. And the people in the game are the ones who are making the mistakes and taking the hits and whatever. The ones on the sidelines, it's safe to be over there because you don't ever get hit, but you're not the one pushing the ball down the field, so to speak, in this metaphor, right?
Yeah.
So there's times where you just gotta give it a shot. You got to take your chances. And it's actually one of my regrets from my experience at Meta, where all of my coworkers were such outstanding technical people. It was intimidating. Every single person I met there was really good. And, when you're in that kind of group, you're like, I don't want to make any mistakes. I don't want to make any mistakes. I should have taken more chances, because they were also serious about another thing, which was their zero blame culture.
That's so helpful.
Having that zero blame culture meant that I could have taken more chances, because even if I screwed up, I'd have had help and things would have been okay. I didn't take advantage of that. And so now what I've taken to the new organization I'm with is I want to perpetuate that zero blame culture. So coworkers make a mistake, I make a mistake, no one gets blamed. We just start asking questions. How was it that this mistake was able to be perpetuated in our environment? How did that even happen? And why don't we have the systems in place to avoid that now? And how are we going to get those systems in place going forward? That kind of thing. It's unfortunate that not all organizations work like that, because it would be great if every organization was perfect, but then none of us would fit in because they're perfect and we're not. So let's try to be a little realistic, but we can cultivate that mindset and that attitude wherever we are. So even if you have I even hate to say it, but if you have a toxic environment, there's a certain level of no blame that you can bring to it, but you're not going to be able to overcome a toxic environment.
Yeah, no. And you bring up a great point that I've benefited from. I've been in the same shoes of like kind of just watching, not really partaking in my career, not really thinking it was worth it or that I could do it really was probably the truth. I didn't really think I could do this kind of cool coding stuff like other people or put things together and do things like they do at big companies because I just work at a smaller place.
Right.
But one thing I got a lot of value out of was finding mentors. And if you are in one of those toxic environments, or even if you're not, you don't have to do it alone. There are other people who are out there putting themselves out there. My messages and DMs are always open if anyone wants a chat or is looking to get connected with people in the community, whatever you need. There are so many of us who are so willing to offer that because we relate to what it's like to be alone trying to figure this all out. There's a lot to IT and corporate life and mixing that with, you got life responsibilities too. And you don't have to do it alone. So don't hesitate to reach out to the community. It's awesome. If you're listening right now, you're the exact type of person we want to hear from. So please reach out.
Work-life balance. Sometimes, so this is one of the things that I actually learned in my running is that in order to perform, you have to rest. And so then when I took that idea, that concept into work, I said, all right, well, there's going to be times at work when deadlines matter and they're there. And, sometimes it's, if we don't meet this deadline, our business goes out of business. Those are super intense. Or we promised the world, if you're doing game dev, we promised the world this thing would be out on this date. Therefore, it has to be out on this date. Super intense. But then there's other ones that aren't as intense, but you still have to ramp up for them. Hey, we have a big project. Hey, we're doing a data center migration. Hey, we're doing whatever it is. So I call that surging up, because there are times at which your effort levels are going to have to be higher than they are at what you would consider to be baseline. However, once you're done surging up, then you do what I call surging down. You got to get back to your baseline, and you may even need to go below it for a little bit to recover from the effort you've just put in, and then get back to baseline. Now, is this perfect? No, it's not, because sometimes you start trying to surge down and the next crisis comes in and knocks you off your path, or you may surge down and get to baseline, and then unfortunately, for whatever reason, they don't have another project for you. This is where you can get stale. You can be like, just coast. I'm not really doing anything. You need to be seeking out your opportunities, but don't pile so many on yourself that you wipe yourself out.
Yep. Especially because you need to anticipate that, a lot of times when people are in the mood where they're listening to something like the PowerShell podcast, they're kind of surging up and they're getting those skills that they're going to rely on and achieve success from in the future. I think that a lot of us who had to learn our first programming language definitely went through a surge period where you kind of had to work a little extra. You couldn't just do it in 30 minutes as you're doing other things. You had to give it some dedicated effort. Exactly. But you got to be careful with how much you take on, because there will be, like you're saying, a time when you don't have the same energies and passion that you can pour into it. You need to make sure that, the workload, at least nowadays, I try and be very intentional about what I accept onto my plate long-term, because I want to be consistent. and not be overwhelmed and burnt out. So it's a juggling act.
Yeah, and in my career, I took on way too much work back in, when was that, 2008. And it just so happened that the situation wasn't good for me, and I didn't have the right mindset, and I also didn't realize how much I was biting off when I said I would do some of these things, and it went poorly for me, and it kind of damaged my reputation a little bit at work. And they're like, we asked him to do this thing and he couldn't do it. Well, there may be reasons for that, but the biggest one was that I just didn't handle it right. I could blame other people, but what point is that for them? They were just doing their work to the best of their ability. It wasn't them. It was me. I took it on. I said I would do it. And then I tried to hold on to too much. And so, the point of that is you got to work within your space and time that you're able to do. I say this about people, like they're starting their career, but they also are starting their family. Families take time. And if you have them, they'll be with you for your entire life, not the job. So try to keep your priorities a little in check on that. Old man advice, right? Try to keep your ideas, because then you get to the life stage where I'm at, where the kids are kind of done with leading your day to day for sure. They don't necessarily even need you week to week. So you can dedicate, more time to things that you wanted to dedicate to, just in general.
Yeah, that is some sage advice. I've been fortunate to hear that early in my career and try and take it serious. But it's kind of been a switch on past maybe 3 months for me, ready to surge off for a little bit here.
Yeah, you've been busy too. You're talking about how many talks I've done. I've seen the onlines of you surging around all over the place.
We're flying all around, man. It's been fun to connect with people, though. I tell you that. I'll also, on the topic of cultures, it's hard to tell if you're in a good culture or bad culture. Maybe you've only had a couple jobs. They're both kind of, you're used to bad managers. For me, a good sign of a healthy culture is when leaders talk about how employees can do their best work when they're taken care of, when they encourage time off and respect time off, right? If you're getting called all the time, every single time you take time off, doesn't sound like those might be some signs of some things that need to change. Maybe those could change with just a message to your manager and a conversation, which I feel like so many people in IT don't have, are just honest conversations. And that can come from a culture thing too, right? You see how do other people communicate? Are they being honest? Are they not? Is it blame culture? Are you getting blamed? Are people afraid to admit when they've done something wrong? These are all kind of signs that you can start looking, and there are better companies out there. And if you have a great skill set and you're a great person, well, you deserve a great company. Right. So you can unlock your heights. Do you work at a place that allows you to go to conferences sometimes and supports your growth outside of just the work hours and just your current projects? Well, hopefully you should. And in worst case, have a conversation with your manager. You'd be so surprised when you have honest conversations about what you want from your career, what you want from your job. Obviously, back it up with hard work and results, but you're going to have a lot more success in life if you're able to have those conversations and make your work be shown and your perspective be heard.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly, because we kind of lose track sometimes of the fact that we deal with systems, we deal with entities, we deal with companies, we deal with software, we deal with hardware, we're dealing with all this stuff, but at the end of the line, behind every last one of those things is a person. And it's not just any person, it's a flawed person. And so, there are trade-offs that people make, and there's limitations to people's knowledge and skills and understanding and all this stuff. And if you really think about it, it's a miracle that anything we have works at all, ever. If you really dig into them. But it's a
lot of moving pieces.
Oh, yeah. It's the concept of nobody knows how to make a pencil, right? People know how to get the wood, people know how to get the paint, people know how to make the erasers, people know how to get the graphite and the graphene and whatever the marking material is anymore. I don't even know. It used to be called lead.
Yeah.
But we haven't used lead for a long time for good reasons.
Yeah, I think there's some health concerns there.
Right, exactly. But it's nobody knows how to do a pencil. Well, tell me any one person who knows how to build one of these crazy things. These phones that we have that are just, in my lifetime went from no communication to everybody's communicating all the time. And so, being able to manage and understand those kinds of things where you're saying, okay, my point where I kind of almost lost my line of thought for a little bit there was your manager is a person. Your company is run by people. Your customers are people. So if you say to them, I'm sorry I missed the deadline, my kid was sick, and I had to prioritize them over my account, only a monster is going to go, I don't care. And maybe you don't want them as your customer anyway, or maybe you don't want them as your boss anyway. Those are the kinds of things that you start thinking about. You're like, oh, okay, well, if that's how you feel about it, then maybe this isn't the right place for me. And then in reverse, if you're the leader, you need to be that person as well. You can be like, hey, I remember when my kid, like from my story, I remember when my child was born and was up every night for 2 straight years because he did not sleep through the night for 2 straight years. That has an effect on you. It's not a positive one. See this? Not a positive effect on you. Also the lines, right? So, I'm joking aside, when someone says, hey, I have a family member with a health concern, or hey, my wife lost her job, or my husband lost a job, depending upon which one's your employee, and you're like, this is impacting me, and it's making my outside work so tumultuous that it's difficult to focus during work hours. The leaders need to understand that, because these are people. Now, the unfortunate truth of our society is there's a certain level of delivery we still have to do, but it needs to be reasonable. And when people are unreasonable, those are red flags all over the place for me. And I've been very blessed and very fortunate to work with really good people, really good leaders at really good companies. So that's kind of my story. I know other people, I hear their stories, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how are these disastrous companies still around? But if you're in that situation, welcome to the PowerShell podcast. We are here to skill you up in PowerShell and other versions of your life so that you can escape from that and not have to stay there.
Yep. And again, by being connected to the community, you can get access to outside perspectives. You don't only have to talk to your coworkers who maybe have similar experiences to you. You can kind of find out the world at large and make some friends who you can say, hey, is it okay? Like, does this happen at your work? I'll say for me, I've worked at companies with poor leadership before, and this working at PDQ has been the first time I've worked with leaders where there's like actually a culture of caring about the employees, no blame to the highest levels. Because I don't just listen to what our leaders say; I watch their actions as well, and the impact you can have on an organization when you're a leader and take care of them. And it really is what you believe, and it's not just like lip service that you give in meetings. It can have such a profound effect. And these are like lessons that I'm looking forward to taking with me through the rest of my career. Because a business is awesome, and it's great that it can make money. And if you're helping people, you'll make money. But it is also a huge collection of people. And people really do better work when they are well and they feel okay to be themselves at work. And you create a culture where there's a little bit of safety everywhere. There's a lot of room for people to be, you mentioned that lifelong learning thing, kind of being vulnerable, being out there. There's a lot of space for a lot of people to be there. And then that creates a culture of everyone's kind of bought in. So just for me, it's very cool to work at an org that like kind of lives out a lot of these values we've heard are really helpful in the PowerShell world and sort of murmured through DevOps over the years.
Yeah.
It's fun stuff.
Yeah. It's, you talk to anyone in any stage of their career, there's going to be that whole, I had a bad boss. It's like, yeah, okay, everyone's had that bad boss. The one I kind of wonder about is, did anyone bother to ask that boss what they were going through at that time?
Like you said earlier, we're all flawed humans going through our own things. Communication, things happen. There's a lot.
Yeah. And so, there's some of that is just, they were just terrible. they're out there. But for the most part, I kind of give people the pass, and they're like, all right, well, let's talk about how can we progress from where we are, and how can I be my full authentic self in this position and grow in the areas that I kind of want to get better at. I remember when I went to the first summit that I went to, PowerShell Summit in 2019. I was in what you call one of those bubbles at my work where we were doing good work, but I and a couple other guys were the leaders of PowerShell and automation. And I went to the summit and I learned what other people were out there doing. And I went, wow, I thought I knew stuff. I realized I didn't know stuff. But I said, that's a goal that I can set for myself, is I want to get to the level of some of these guys and some of the gals that were there, because their skill level is so high. Like, okay, there's levels and then there's levels. I want to be on the path where I can reach this spot. Also, I need to be connected to the community. Also, I need to improve my speaking. I mean, I was fairly decent before, but I saw some really outstanding presentations. Like, well, okay, what is it about their presentations that made them so good? And how can I incorporate that into my talks, but not clone them, be authentically me? And for me, as you know very well, that means dad jokes. And not just any old dad jokes. I'm not using someone else's I can has dad joke in my stuff. I'm writing my own, and I'm using my own for my talks. And that's, but that's my audience engagement. That's how I do it.
And that's important. It's important to be authentically yourself. And for some people, they're going to really resonate with that. And other people, it's not going to be the right fit for them. And that's totally okay. We don't need one voice to rule them all. There's space for my perspective, your perspective, so many other people's perspective. Beginners out there, there's tons of space for your perspective as well, because like any high performing team, that a diverse perspective is going to lead to better results. When you have people who are thinking about problems in different ways, you're going to consider things you wouldn't have considered otherwise.
Yep. Agreed.
Well, man, we did it. We had another fantastic conversation, man. We covered a lot, and I feel like we could keep going for a couple more hours here.
You know me. I've got the record for a reason. You pull my string and I just talk forever. But
you know what?
This has been a good conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. And you know what? Shout out to everyone out there. Whenever you heard Judd say, I can has dad jokes, and you think to yourself, oh, I wrote a PowerShell function that queries that API to give me a dad joke. If that's you, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. And if it's not you, leave a 6-star review. Okay. Thank you very much. You can join us on the PDQ Discord, discord.gg/PDQ. That's been super sweet. It's more like an inner circle of people who are maybe listening to the podcast and kind of want to share what they're going through. Think of it like a small group chat. There's also the PowerShell Discord at large to engage with the larger community, aka.ms/PS Discord. Definitely recommend checking that out. Make use of the search functionality, because there are a lot of messages that may address your question. That's a fantastic resource.
And there's some really smart dudes and dudettes that are out there in that group. I mean, I'm astonished at the knowledge of some of the community members. I'm not even going to name names, because I would be here for another 5 minutes naming names. But if you're out there, you know who you are, and I appreciate you.
Yes, many names come to mind when you say that. But then there's, what's their real name? I know their username, and then I don't want to miss anybody.
Yeah,
there's a few of those. But shout out to the PowerShell community at large. Shout out to everyone at home listening. And Judd, I got one final question for you.
Okay.
In your memory, so go back. You can close your eyes if you want. Think of it as a meditation. When you go back to that moment, you just delivered the talk with Jason Helmick to roaring applause. People are standing, roses are flying. What song is playing in your mind in that memory? And if there isn't a song playing, you got to insert one and tell me what it is.
We Are the Champions.
Yes. I thought it right, dude. Yes. Well, Congratulations, man. It's been so cool. I'm very privileged to be able to call you a friend and to be able to keep growing through our careers together and keeping track over the years and keeping in touch. So appreciative of you joining me today for a celebration. And I think we gave out some solid advice. I wish 10 years ago I could have listened to this conversation.
I wish 10 years ago I knew this stuff. So, that's kind of how it comes. For myself, shameless promotions is I'm at Stephen Judd on the X, and I'm Stephen Judd on LinkedIn. If you YouTube search, make sure you add PowerShell to searching for Stephen Judd, because there's some other Steve Judds out there that are doing some questionable things that is not me.
Not dad jokes. Okay.
They're outside those. Not those. Yeah. And then finally, if you just go to shortcutyour.life, that'll send you over to my blog where you can see my materials for talks I've done, books I've worked on, podcasts I've been on, and I kind of need to get up there and update some because I've been busy.
You have been. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Have a safe drive if you're driving. If you're not driving, have a safe seat in your chair. Judd, have a great night, man. And happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday, Andrew.
Happy Memorial Day, I think.
I was saying, but is that still copyrighted? I don't know.
We'll say it is to save me from the awkwardness.
Yeah, well, I do have a music degree, and the cello in the background is not just some prop. So I can actually sing happy birthday on key and on pitch, but I'll save the audience for that, and we'll do that some other time. Thank you for having me on, Andrew. I appreciate you.
Last thing, there will be 3 songs of Judd's choosing in the show notes. Check them out. Mystery songs. I don't know what they are. Judd doesn't even know what they are, but they're going to be there. Check them out. There will be 3 hidden songs in the show notes. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.